11-year-old Jean thought she was saying her last goodbye when she placed her father's phone in his coffin. But the very next day, it rang, and you'll be left in tears when you find out who was on the other end. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from, and subscribe for more awesome stories. The funeral chapel was cold, contrasting cruelly with the bright sunlight outside. Jean stood before the casket, clutching a white rose, her small shoulders trembling. At 11, her world had shattered. Her father David lay still, his face peaceful but empty. He was gone, and so was her sense of safety. Since losing her mother, Isabella, in a car accident she could barely remember, David had been her whole world, her protector, her laughter, her everything. Now, he was just a memory, and Jean felt the crushing weight of loneliness. Her fingers shook as she placed his cell phone inside the coffin, whispering, "I'll always be with you, Daddy." During his last days, the phone had been their lifeline, connecting them through video calls when he was too weak to come home. She believed it could keep them connected even now. As the casket closed, sealing away her only parent, a cold emptiness wrapped around her heart, and she felt her world darken. Amelia, David's sister, placed a protective arm around Jean, her voice soft. "Come on, sweetheart." Jean barely knew her aunt beyond holiday visits, and the touch felt distant, foreign. But she had no choice. Her home was gone, her father buried, and she was moving in with Amelia, a woman who was a stranger, and a house that was nothing like her own. Amelia's house was grand, pristine, filled with expensive furniture and silent rooms. It was cold, devoid of memories, nothing like the small, warm home she had shared with her father. There were no photos of Isabella smiling down at her, no faint scent of David's cologne. Just emptiness and shadows that felt too long, too dark. Jean felt like an intruder, a ghost lost in a place that wasn't hers. She didn't belong here. She didn't belong anywhere anymore. That night, Jean lay curled in a bed that wasn't hers, hugging a framed photo of David, his smile frozen in time. Her tears soaked the pillow as she whispered, "I miss you, Daddy." The room was cold, silent, and the darkness felt heavy, pressing down on her. Exhausted, she drifted into a restless sleep, her heart aching. At 3:15 a.m., she woke suddenly, her heart pounding. A sound echoed through the hallway, a faint ringtone. Her breath caught in her throat. It was his ringtone, the one he set just for her. The melody was soft, distant, but unmistakable. Jean's body went cold. She had placed his phone in the coffin. It was impossible. But the sound continued, calling to her. Her feet moved on instinct, carrying her through the dark hallway, the cold air biting her skin. The ringtone grew louder as she approached the living room, echoing off the walls. But the moment she stepped inside, it stopped. Silence filled the room, cold and empty. Shadows stretched across the floor, twisting unnaturally. A cold draft rushed past her, chilling her to the bone. She whispered, "Daddy?" Her voice trembled, echoing back to her. There was no answer, just the cold and the shadows that seemed to watch her. Jean backed away, heart racing, her breath visible in the freezing air. She ran back to her room, diving under the blankets, shaking. The coldness followed, wrapping around her, refusing to let go. She closed her eyes, her body trembling, whispering, "Daddy, are you there?" But only silence answered. She clung to his photo, tears soaking the pillow, too scared to sleep. The morning light did nothing to lift the cold heaviness Jean felt. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, a cruel trick her mind played because she missed him so much. But as she sat alone in her room, hugging her father's photo, her phone rang, the sudden sound breaking the silence. Her heart stopped. Her father's name glowed on the screen, his number. Her fingers went cold. She had placed his phone in the coffin. It wasn't possible. Her hands trembled as she answered, her voice shaking. "Daddy?" Static crackled, then his voice came through, faint and hollow. "Jean, where am I? It's so dark, so cold." Ian's chest tightened. It was his voice, but distant, broken, as if from somewhere far away. "Daddy, where are you? I miss you." His voice quivered, fading through the static. "I don't know. I'm trapped. I can't breathe. Help me, Jean." He call ended. The screen went blank. He was calling her from the grave. Jean ran to Amelia, her voice trembling. "He called me. Daddy's alive." Amelia's face softened, her eyes full of pity. She took the phone, quickly checking the call log. Nothing. No missed calls, no history. It was blank. A chill ran through Amelia, but she forced a soft smile, handing the phone back to Jean. Sweetheart, it's just grief. Sometimes we hear things when we missed someone. She kept the truth to herself. There was no evidence. The call never existed. Jean's heart sank. She knew his voice, even broken and distant. But Amelia didn't believe her. No one would. She felt the cold emptiness growing, the loneliness wrapping around her like shadows she couldn't escape. She was alone. Her father was calling for help, and no one believed her. Every night, at exactly 3:15 a.m., the same faint ringtone echoed through the hallway, leading her to the same cold, empty spot before abruptly stopping. No phone, no one there. Just shadows and silence. She stood there every night, her body trembling, waiting for the call to start again. But it never did. Only at 3:15 a.m., only once, and then, nothing. During the day, her phone would ring. It was always unexpected, random. And every time, she would hear his voice, faint and broken. Jean, where am I? It's so dark. Oh, it's cold. His words were always the same, pleading, scared. The calls ended abruptly, the line going dead without warning. There were no records, no call logs. Her phone remained blank, empty, as if she had imagined it all. But she knew she hadn't. She stopped telling anyone about the calls, afraid they'd think she was crazy. Amelia watched as Jean grew quieter, her eyes hollow, her face pale. Jean's grades plummeted, her laughter vanished, and she withdrew from everyone. She wandered through her days in a fog, haunted by the nightly ringtone and her father's broken voice. Every morning her eyes were hollow, dark circles deepening as she slipped further away, lost in grief and fear. Amelia watched in growing alarm, her heart breaking as Jean became a ghost of herself. The once bright child was fading, and she was powerless to help. Desperate, she made a decision. Without saying a word to Jean, she scheduled an appointment and took her to see Dr. Evans, a therapist specializing in grief and trauma. Jean sat stiffly in the chair, her eyes downcast, her body tense. Dr. Evans spoke softly, her voice gentle. Jean, sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we miss someone we love. Can you tell me what you've been hearing? Jean hesitated, her voice cracking as she finally spoke. He calls me, but his phone it's in his coffin. But I hear him. He says he's trapped, that he's cold, that he needs help. Her hands shook, her eyes filling with tears. And every night at 3:15, his ringtone. It echoes through the hallway, but there's no one there. It just stops. Dr. Evans's face remained calm, her voice steady. You're not crazy, Jean. When we lose someone we love deeply, our mind sometimes keeps them close by creating a way to hear them. It's called auditory hallucination. It's how your heart is trying to hold on because you're not ready to let go. Jean's chest tightened. So, it's just my imagination? Dr. Evans nodded gently. Yes, it's your mind protecting you from the pain of losing him. It's trying to keep him close, even though he's gone. It doesn't mean he didn't love you. It just means you're hurting. And it's okay to hurt. It's okay to miss him. Jean's shoulders shook as the tears came, the truth sinking in. She wasn't hearing his voice. She was hearing her own grief, her own fear of letting him go. It wasn't him calling her. It was her heart refusing to say goodbye. Jean started attending therapy regularly, learning how to cope with her grief, how to let go of the fear without letting go of the love. The therapy sessions helped her understand that the calls were her way of holding on, her heart's way of refusing to say goodbye. The nightly ringtone grew fainter, the shadows less frightening. She realized that her mind had created the calls because she was scared of forgetting him, scared of losing his voice forever. That night, Jean lay in bed, the house silent and warm. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a sense of calm as if she was ready now, ready to remember him with love, without fear. Her eyes grew heavy, drifting towards sleep, when her phone rang. Her heart stopped. It was his number. The screen glowed softly, her father's name smiling up at her. Her hands trembled as she answered, her voice barely a whisper. Daddy? His voice came through, warm and gentle, no longer broken or distant. Jean, I love you. It's okay to let go. I'm always with you. Tears filled her eyes, spilling over as she clutched the phone to her ear, her voice breaking. I love you too, Daddy. Goodbye. The call ended. The phone turned off on its own, the screen going dark. It never rang again. Jean smiled through her tears, feeling a peace she hadn't known since his death. He was at rest, and so was she. She knew he was still with her, not through the phone, but in her heart, in her memories. The next day, Jean stood at her father's grave, the phone cradled in her hands. Her voice was steady, calm. "Goodbye, Daddy. I'll always love you." She placed the phone on the earth, saying her final farewell. As she turned away, a breeze rustled through the trees, warm and gentle, wrapping around her like an embrace. She heard his whisper, soft and loving, "I love you, Jean." Jean closed her eyes, letting the tears fall, but they were tears of peace, not pain. The shadows were gone. The cold drafts had vanished. She was ready to live, to carry his love forward, to remember him without fear. She was no longer trapped in the past. She was free. Jean returned home to Amelia, her eyes bright, her heart light. Amelia hugged her tightly, her voice choked with relief. "I missed you, sweetheart." Jean held on, feeling warmth and love, feeling safe. She was no longer haunted. She was no longer afraid. She was home. She spent the evening reading through Isabella's diary, treasuring the stories of her parents' love, of the laughter and joy that had filled their lives. She realized that love didn't end with death. It continued, through memories, through stories, through the love she carried inside her. Jean felt a deep sense of peace, knowing her parents were together, watching over her. She closed the diary, her heart full, her soul calm. She wasn't alone. She never would be. Their love was with her, always. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Stay connected for more emotional and thought-provoking stories that celebrate love, hope, and the power of memory. And we'd love to hear your interpretation of Jean's journey. What do you think about the final call and the whisper Jean heard at the cemetery? Do you think they were real, or were they part of her healing process? Was it her heart letting go, or was it something more? Let us know what you believe in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.